Forgot to record. Now I'm recording. Before we begin, please let me know if there are any technical issues that I can try to resolve. You can send those to me in the chat. Any questions you have can be sent via the Q&A button, and we'll answer those at the end. This program is made possible by the generous donors to the Cary Library Foundation. I'd like to now introduce Ashley Rooney, a prolific author and past president of the Lexington Field and Garden Club. Ashley has hosted our spring and summer weekly gardening series, and she's back for this whole month on a weekly basis, and after that, once a month. We are incredibly grateful for the wide cast of gardening experts that she's brought to the library. So please welcome Ashley.
Thank you, Matt. And today I'm delighted. We are going to start moving into fall planting. And usually people think of daffodils and tulips, which are lovely displays, but there are many other gorgeous bulbs out there. And Guy Doran, who's spoken before in this program and who everybody knows and loves, is going to explain how to handle these bulbs, how to put them in the ground, and show some examples of wonderful bulbs. And then we can talk about all our feelings for it. So we're going to cut right to a video taken recently where Guy it was a little early putting bulbs in, but we tried to do it, and there he is.
If I'm doing individual bulbs, is to use a good hand trowel. But there's other methods as well. In my second life, for about 10 years, I used one of these on the end of a half-inch power drill, electric power drill, and it is an auger, and you attach it to the drill, and it drills a hole, and if you're lucky enough to have another person with you, they're on their knees putting the bulbs into the hole. I will caution you strongly to consider not using this, because if you're using it and you hit a good rock or a strong root, the power drill that you're holding keeps going around with your wrist, and this doesn't. So it can be a little painful, but if you're up for it, you can use that. Then of course, again, a two-man job. If you use a hand shovel like this, you can do individual holes and have somebody else put the bulbs in, or we're going to actually use a little larger shovel and do multiple bulbs at once. So why don't we cut to a commercial, and we'll be right with you.
1 second, sorry, I'm just grabbing the other one.
I was afraid you got caught by that auger.
We're supposed to be doing a commercial.
Why not to use an auger for bulb planting?
You're on.
So we've got our area dug, and I'm putting a moderate amount of the bulb tone in. And this is actually sort of a slow acting fertilizer. I mix it in with the soil. The old product that was used for years and years before companies started coming out with special products for bulbs was bone meal. And again, it takes a while for it to break down, but the nice thing about bulbs is that...
Why don't I try to restart it? I don't know, I didn't realize it's freezing. Let's see, go back.
And this is actually sort of a slow...
1 second, let me just restart the video from, I'll just cut the program. Sorry about that.
Oops. Can you, okay.
What was the question that can we share it?
Can we share the number of the name of the fertilizer you used?
Oh.
Guy,
It
what was
was
it?
Espoma bulb tone.
I'll write that in the chat. I was just wanting to make sure
Okay.
that this is actually working properly. If it freezes up again, I think we'll just have to go with it, and then
Deal with it.
I'll share the videos after to everyone.
Okay.
You're on.
So we've got our area dug, and I'm putting a moderate amount of the bulb tone in. And this is actually sort of a slow acting fertilizer. I mix it in with the soil. The old product that was used for years and years before companies started coming out with special products for bulbs was bone meal. And again, it takes a while for it to break down, but the nice thing about bulbs is that everything it needs really is in there. And the leaves and the flower, everything is already formed in the bulb, and you can grow them without soil and without fertilizer, but with water. But the fertilizer is there for the spring to give you a better plant. And in the case of daffodils, it's building the bulb up for the following year. So feeding is good on most of the bulbs that you planted. Now the advantage of digging an area like this, as opposed to planting individual bulbs, is that you can put a nice display of these. I'm putting them about 6 inches apart. Now, maybe a little less because of the daffodils. If these were tulips, I'd put them maybe 6 inches. I'll probably do a little less on these, because if we're successful, they will fill in and end up actually crowding each other out. So we'll give them a little less in an area like that. I should have mentioned that the catalogs will give you depth, and if you buy packages in the garden center, they'll also give you a tag that will give you the correct depth. Usually it's about 3 times the size of the bulb as far as the depth. So now that they're in, I'm carefully filling this back in. You will notice that I put the point up, and these are old roots, so that gives you a pretty good indication as to what side goes up and what goes down. And most bulbs will be almost self-explanatory, but if you were to put them in wrong, or if one got tipped over, they will still come up. They actually, when they sprout, they turn around and grow up. So that's really not a major problem, but it's nice to have them going the right way. Now, as I'm sure you've experienced, as we all have, this has been a very, very dry summer. This area doesn't have irrigation, so the soil was dry. And later I'm gonna drag a hose over and give this a drink, but in most cases from now until the end of November, we're gonna get some good rain that will soak in. But to give these a fair start, I will end up watering. Now that I've filled that back in, I can pull the mulch that was here back on.
And there we are. I hope you're right when you said we're going to get some good rains. I thought today was going to be a downpour. We need it for sure.
We do.
Oh,
A couple of things that I didn't mention in there was, to begin with, in selecting, if you go and buy bags of bulbs and not individual bulbs out of a display, you want to kind of give them several of the bulbs a gentle squeeze to see if they're nice and firm. When I went to Home Depot for those, the first lot that I came to, I found in every bag 2 or 3 or 4 that were very soft. And then they had another brand, not another variety, but another brand that they had bought. And those were very good. They were all nice and firm and good sized bulbs. So be a little cautious. I think if you order from mail order houses, especially the 3 that we've listed, that will show up in the end in a list, they're all very good. I've bought from all 3 of them and I've never been displeased. Occasionally, you buy 50 little crocus bulbs, you might get one that isn't quite right, or 100 tulip bulbs, you might find 2 that look a little different than the others, but I wouldn't complain. I think that in general, if the overall quality is good. The other thing that I'm sure, Ashley, you'll agree with, when a lot of bulbs, a lot of different varieties of things, especially tulips, never plant them in just a single row. It just isn't pleasing. That almost all of them, if you plant in groups of 3 or more, it's just more pleasing to the eye, and I think you'll enjoy them better in the spring.
yes, your circle is very nice. We have a question from my friend Bridget. How do I protect bulbs from moles and voles and chipmunks and squirrels?
Well, I think one of one of the things that draws them in, sometimes it isn't necessarily the bulb, it's the fertilizer you use, unfortunately. And I will say that you can not use the fertilizer. And when you have bulbs like daffodils and some of the more common naturalizing bulbs that feed them in the spring, just as they're coming through the ground, if you go around the bulbs and scratch it in lightly, when they really need that fertilizer, it will be available to them. And it's less likely for them to dig up the established bulbs than it is when you first plant them with the loose soil. The one bulb that I've had the most problem with over the years, to the point where I haven't planted them, is crocus. Chipmunks love crocus.
Oh.
I would watch them lug bags of crocus off of the display cases when we had our store. I even saw a chipmunk come in with a little wheelbarrow and take some out one day. But one thing you can do is, if you are planting in groups like that if you have hardware cloth or some fine chicken wire, you can lay it over the top of the soil and just weight it down with a couple of stones. And generally that keeps them from digging them up. And then late fall, when the ground's freezing, just pick up the wire and put it away till next year.
But there are bulbs, Guy, that the animals don't like. I mean,
Absolutely.
they don't like allium. They don't like
Yep.
daffodils. And I find that I will plant a ring of daffodils around my tulips, which they adore.
Yep.
And usually that prevents them from coming in. Though I just read in White Flower Catalog that they said figure tulips are an annual planting and just dig them up at the end of the year. And I was horrified. We have another question, and we have more pictures to do. If planting new bulbs, what is the best way to add to an established bed of bulbs?
Well, you don't really know where the established bulbs are. And I've planted several times in areas that have had bulbs added every year. And, you know, it's a gamble, but if you hit a bulb, you replant it and put the new one a little further away. And generally that won't bother the established bulbs. If they get dug and replanted right then, they will continue to reestablish themselves and they should be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And also, just jumping back to the animals, most catalogs will tell you if they're prone to deer or if they're deer resistant or animal resistant. A lot of good catalogs will give you that heads up.
That they do. Keep your questions coming. We have Guy has a series of images from a very good book, and why don't we show those now, and we can go from there.
Okay, this is in Kurdistan or northern Turkey. I forget exactly where it is, but a tremendous number of the bulb varieties that we sold and we grow here came from the Caucasus, the higher elevations going across all the stands in China, Turkey, some start in Spain and Portugal and southern France, and higher elevations. And actually you'd be surprised at the type of soil that they grow in. They grow in gravelly, sandy soil at these higher elevations, a clay type soil, in some cases scree, which is at the base of rocky mountains. That scree is the chips that fall down over the millions of years to the bottom, and it's a very gravelly mixture. And even though that's where a lot of these soils come from, the bulbs come from in areas like this, you can still plant them in your gardens, but just do some research. You'll find that if things need a little better drained soil, that they will indicate it. I'm thinking of, let's say, hyacinths that don't like wet feet. But in normal garden soil around here, most everything does well. The next picture is
Matt?
yeah, that's just again in one of the stands, and here are people that have gone out and collected bulbs. It's a different way of life over there, obviously, but that's where a tremendous number of the varieties we grow today originated. And then in a lot of cases, they came back to Holland, and the majority of tulips and daffodils and the large flowered hyacinths that we plant now are all came from the original strains that were in these other areas, but they have been bred for larger flowers and better foliage, etc. So they've come a long way. They were tulip bulbs were traded on an exchange originally in Holland, and they were treated like money.
Yeah.
Quite a thing. I think first flower picture is colchicum, and this is known as a fall crocus. It's actually underused. They flower in the fall, and then the foliage comes up in the spring, and they're marvelous. They really, really are. And I was taught about them from a lady years and years ago, Claire Reed, who was quite a woman. She got me to carry them in the store. The one thing I'll caution you about, you should order them very early when the catalogs first come out, so that they're shipped immediately when the companies receive them in this country. The very earliest ones sometimes will come in already showing flowers coming out of the bulb. Not to be upset about that, it's just that's how early the early colchicums are. You should probably consider buying mid-season or late season colchicums. But if you do buy an early one or that comes in with flowers, just plant them. Unfortunately, you might not enjoy them the first season, but they're a pretty reliable bulb. And again, the foliage should come up in the spring, and the following fall, you'll have flowers just like this.
I have them on my front lawn, and people stop, the tourists stop, they want to know what that flower is. They find it amazing because it's so late in the year. Yeah.
Yeah, they're great. They really are. Moving along to the next crocus, there are the main crocus that we all tend to know, or the common ones, are in the spring. There are other fall crocuses that look like the spring crocuses that do come up. The foliage will come up and then they'll flower in the fall. And those are nice, they're good. Probably the most popular ones used are the spring crocus. And they are early. They're not the first spring bulbs. In back of these crocus, you'll see snowdrops, those are one of the first bulbs that come up, especially if they're in sort of a east or west southerly exposure and near the house that tends to run a little warmer, and they'll poke up through the snow even. Moving along to the next one is another, well, these are snowdrops, a nice bed of them. In fact, they naturalize very well if they have the area. The next one that's coming along is grape hyacinths. Again, early flowering bulb. There are areas, if you have areas that you want to naturalize along the edge of woodlands and meadows, that all these bulbs work in very well in front of those types of areas. The next one, yeah.
Let me interrupt here because we were asked a question from Regina. Do all bulbs need to be planted in a sunny location, or are there bulbs such as this one that could be planted in shady locations?
A lot of these will definitely take open shade. And just so I don't forget, they all love sun, but there are a few things, and the one that comes to mind is when we get to daffodils and narcissus, that your pink narcissus and salmon colored narcissus and daffodils should be in filtered sun or definitely in open shade, because if they're in too bright an area, too hot an area, it will fade the salmon and the pink shades.
Right.
They won't enjoy those as much, but most bulbs will take open shade as they will full sun.
And many of these bulbs come up early spring while the trees aren't out yet. So they'd be all right. Okay, thank you for letting me know.
Moving to the next one is the cilla. Again, one of the small bulbs. And some people will mix all the small bulbs like the snowdrops and different cillas and crocus and just naturalize a whole area. And there are people that will plant an area of their lawn that they all come up, they all work in the grass well, and just probably one of the main things you do is you don't mow your lawn until they've flowered and the foliage has had a chance to go by. So if you have an area in the back of the yard or side yard that you can let be a little more natural in the springtime, it's quite enjoyable to have these small bulbs.
I also find that these spread like crazy.
They do. Many of them do. Absolutely. The next one is a main category is Narcissus. And I'll point out that Narcissus, daffodils, jonquils, they're all basically the same. It has to do with the trumpet size, the flower size, the number of flowers per stem, but they basically are all kind of lumped into a major category called daffodils, and they're all enjoyable. And I think that if you get a good catalog and you take the time to read all the different descriptions and decide on the colors and where you're going to put them, whether you're going to naturalize with them or just have them once for the spring and then take them out of that garden. And if you do something like that, you might consider moving them to a wooded area where they can naturalize on their own.
With daffodils, you can also stage your plantings, so you can have a sequence of plantings, early, middle, and late. And so the daffodil season will go longer, which is really nice too. Yeah.
And mixed together.
Yeah.
Even.
Yeah.
So that you have this constant color, even though some are just coming out and others are going by.
Right. Which can be very lovely.
Yeah. And again, a lot of the varieties have been bred by the Dutch for larger flowers and newer colors. So, but they're tremendous. They're probably one of the #1 bulbs that's used, aside from tulips.
And animals don't eat them.
No, they don't. And they're great for cutting. I mean, if you have an area that you like cut flowers, put some extra ones in and cut them and bring them in.
Yeah.
The next one is hyacinths, which I think underused. They actually
that's gorgeous.
Oh, they are, and the fragrance. I don't think there's anything that beats the fragrance of hyacinths, and they naturalize well. I think I mentioned earlier, they don't like wet feet, so they should be in a fairly well-drained area. Not that they like to be in an arid area. They don't want to dry up, but again, they naturalize well, and they are underused. I think that if more people bought them, that you would enjoy them. I really do. Unfortunately, in thinking, I rely on the Dutch growers and the shippers, and they've never really the percentage of hyacinths in some of the bulb displays that they ship to garden centers isn't large. I wouldn't. I think that's too bad, because I think there's a lot of potential for hyacinths in the gardens, and the height is a nice height.
One of the things, Guy, I've found with hyacinths is their stems can get floppy on me. And all of a sudden the hyacinth is bending over, and that beautiful aroma is down to the ground.
Well, you can stake them, but I think once they've been in for a couple of years and you have a nice clump, that they even become a little bit self-supporting because of the size of the clump and more stems.
Okay. We have a question here. Let's stop for a minute. What does naturalize mean? Do you want to explain that, Guy?
It just means that it's part of the landscape, and in a lot of cases, it's more of a natural area, either a woodland area or more of a meadow area, I guess, an area that you're not constantly digging up and replanting seasonally. It's an area that you let go that could have other perennials that stay there, and it's not like an annual garden. It's a garden that you just maintain what's there, and I guess you would say instead of naturalizing, it would be more of a perennial in your garden.
Doesn't naturalize also mean that they are spreading a little bit, that I would expect
Yeah.
the daffodils to take over?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. That's a beautiful picture.
It is.
Yeah.
I think some of these pictures may come from, like that may come from, what's the big garden in Holland?
Oh, yeah.
Kuchenhof.
One that I can't pronounce. Okay.
Kuchenhof.
Yeah. On to the next picture. One of my favorites. Yeah.
And if you go to bulb books, and especially one of them that we're going to recommend, the one by Random House on bulbs, the number of alliums and types of alliums is tremendous, far more than I ever thought knew about. And you've got quite a few varieties, sizes, and types that come as bulbs, but then there are what I guess they get classified as perennials, even though they're all considered bulbs, come from bulbs. But in the springtime, in your perennial sections of garden centers, you'll find quite a few varieties of alliums as well. Nice thing about alliums is that they, not only the height in many cases, but they're great in companion planting. If you watch your heights, and you can mix them in with other plants. And I was involved in a very special garden for several years that we planted them in amongst all the hostas. And so the hosta foliage would be up pretty much at full height, and then the alliums would come up and flower above the hostas and would have this wonderful season of alliums with the hosta foliage. And then when the alliums had gone by a little later in the season, you had the hosta flowers. So you really get 2 seasons of color in those gardens, and that was very special.
And just let me add, because I'm an allium lover, the animals don't like this. The bugs and the pollinators love it. And you can let them dry in your garden, and then they stand beautifully in brown, standing still amongst your roses or lilies or whatever is blooming at that point.
Yep.
And they come in all sorts of colors, purple, whites, blues, and pinks. And they're allium that even go into late summer. I finally convinced my husband to buy a few more. Not that I have any room for them, but anyway.
But you're right. Once the flowers go by and they dry, and if you cut those and use them as dried flowers in the fall,
They're great.
very well.
Yeah, they're very nice in arrangements.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. And the next one is another big category, the tulips.
Oh, yeah.
So many varieties, starting with some very early ones, species type tulips, very low and early, and working well through the spring season. with all different types of flowers. Your peony flowered, lily flowered, doubles, singles, early cottage, Darwin's, so many different ones. And again, so much breeding that was done in Holland to give you larger size and different colors and blends of colors. It's they're just wonderful. They really are. And something that I happened to think of just before we started, if you look in your catalog, some of the later ones, if you look, some of the varieties of listed will be described as tetraploids, triploids, or tetraploids. And those are really, really special.
Say that word slowly, Guy.
Tetraploid.
Tetraploid. Okay.
Yeah. And if anybody is into daylilies, they might be familiar with that term because over the years in breeding, that some of the bigger, really fancier daylilies are tetraploids, and the same is true in the tulip world. If you buy French tulips with the real long stems and the real big heads, those are tetraploids. And there are quite a few varieties that you can buy for the garden that are tetraploids. The one that comes to mind is, and it wasn't named after a very special friend, but it has the same name. It's called Maureen.
Oh.
And I've planted Maureen tulips for several years, and they are very special.
We'll all go looking for Maureen tulips now.
There you go. She may buy them all. I don't know. So that's pretty much the main categories of bulbs. There's so many other small bulbs and specialty bulbs, but if you were to start planting these that we've looked at and read your catalogs carefully, I think you'll find that in coming years that you'll expand your bulb gardens tremendously. I think that the next picture might be one in your garden, from your garden, Ashley. Aha.
Yeah.
That's
That's an allium.
That's an allium with a wonderful honeybee on it.
Yeah.
And I'd have to say, in fact, I just read an article. I don't remember whether it was in this recently in this Sunday's paper or what, but it was a good reminder. It was about bulbs and bees. And it's one of the first things that the bees get to feed on. And it's actually very, very important. The more bulbs that we can get out there to help the honeybees and all the bees, that it's one of the things that they look for. They love bulbs, and it's the earliest thing out there really for them, and it's very important.
Yeah, you see them on the allium because the allium are so many of the allium are so big. There may be 4 or 5 bees on one bulb, just sitting there. I mean, it's amazing to watch them.
Yeah, it is.
Now, as I've gotten more accustomed to looking for pollinators all the time. Now you have a couple more slides there. Don't forget to, yeah, we're getting to that, Regina.
Oh, that's just a planting depth to give you an idea. Starting, well, over on the right-hand side, it says Narcissus, but that would be one of the small dwarfs. And Crocus, I don't see what's what the one way over on the right is, but you can see that they're at about 3 inches. And the cilla are a little deeper, but you can see where the daffodils and the tulips are. They're down, the daffodils 7 or 8 inches, the tulips 7 or 8 inches. Hyacinths is up at 5. So it gives you an idea as to depth.
Talk about the iris a bit, because people ask me often why their iris aren't blooming, and it's often because they're too deep.
That's right. You can see that they're right up at ground level. In fact, before we started this program, we were talking about what perennials could be planted now, and iris is one, but the one that really comes to mind is peonies. If you're going to move or divide peonies, this is a perfect time to do it. But the peony would be just like the iris there. They'd be right up at just below ground level. Very important. Too deep and they're not going to flower. If you put them down where the hyacinth is, that it will affect your flowering. But also bear in mind that if you plant them at the right depth, but then you put a heavy mulch over them every single year, eventually they're going to be too deep. So keep that in mind.
Guy, we have a question. The allium we just showed, and I cannot find it in my catalog. What do you think the name of that was? It's a late blooming allium, obviously.
Oh, gee.
Summer Drummer. The Summer Drummer
Well,
is blue.
that was one. Was that one at the church where we planted?
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's probably one of the alliums that you would buy as a perennial.
Yeah.
I would guess, but I don't know what variety it is.
They're alliums that bloom in late June and July, and you'd have to go through your catalog and look for that.
And even into August and September. So if you don't find it in the catalog as a bulb, you'll want to.
Oh, wait a minute.
You'll want to at least check with garden centers that tend to sell alliums. So if you want the Russells in the spring, they have quite a variety of perennial, what they would call perennial allium, and you'd get an idea as to the flowering times from them.
It looks like Mount Everest in the catalog, in the white flower catalog. Okay. If peonies or bulbs are in mulch that's become too deep, can mulch just be scraped away, or should the plant be dug up and replanted?
Well, if they're older, if they're old and they've been in for a while and they haven't been flowering and you feel they're too deep, dividing would be the thing to do anyway.
Yeah.
And that should make an effect on the flowering and how they do in the future.
Yeah, that's particularly true with iris.
Yep.
Is it possible to make the planting depth chart available to download? Matt, can you download this chart?
So I will send out this whole slideshow to everyone who signed up after this program.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Now,
I think when we did, I think the video, some of it in the very beginning, I think got cut out because I explained that most of your, when you go to buy bulbs, if they're loose bulbs in a display at the garden centers, I would say they would have labels or tags with each variety that you would break off or tear off and put in the bag with your bulbs, and that should have the spacing and the planting depth. Or pre-bag bulbs, the labels will have the depth and the planting, the spacing. So.
Right. And we have 2 more slides there. I think there, the recommended mail order catalogs.
Yeah, those 3, I find these 3 to be very, very dependable sources. And there are others. 2 that come to mind is Van Borgendine, that has been around for a long time, and Brex. I think they tend to be what you would consider mail order type people, in the sense that they probably, I'm only assuming, but I think I may be correct. They buy bulbs on the Dutch bulb auctions and market them. Just, great pictures, great descriptions. But these three companies, and actually Scheppers and Van Egelen, are owned together now. And Brent and Becky's down in Virginia. These three companies, they in some cases contract to have their bulbs grown or grow their own bulbs, and I've found tremendously reliable. One of the main suppliers to garden centers in this area, or across the country really, for years was Van Eden. And if you had to reorder from Van Eden in season, their backup was Van Egelen, the third one there. So I know from back then how good they were.
Okay.
The other thing, I lost it now, what I was going to say about.
That's probably because I started to interrupt you. I have a whole array of questions I just
Sure.
found. Your view of tulip bulbs is annual. Any tips on helping them to winter over? My second year display is usually just a small percentage of the first. Would you recommend lifting and replanting with more fertilizer? Suggestions?
You want me to tell them the story?
Go on.
That if you feed the tulips when they come up, and you allow them to flower and then go through their whole cycle of and not doing anything with them other than keeping them watered until the foliage has died back, then you really should dig them like they do in Holland and dry them in a cool, dry spot. I had an aunt and uncle that did this for years down on the Cape. They put them on old window screens so that the air circulation was good, and they kept them in a cool, dark garage. And then in the fall, when it's time to plant the bulbs again, they had them all labeled color-wise, and they would take them back out and plant them. And they did this for years and years, and they had a tremendous tulip display in the spring. But that's how it's done.
Okay, Miriam, so that's your, MMM, that's your question. If you have to dig up those tulip bulbs and start it all over again. A friend and I were just over at Mahoney's, and we were wondering what happened to all those tulips they had out there in the spring. That's what they do with them. Now, we have a bunch more, so we're going to be really quick here. Are there any bulbs that are native to this area?
I don't know. Why don't you take that one?
I don't know the answer to that.
I don't either.
For that. I think most bulbs, as Guy spoke about, have come from abroad, and we've worked on them, cultivated them, and done all sorts of things with them. Can you repeat and spell the name of that early fall crocus that was pink? Okay, that'll be on the list. There's a list that we're also going to give you of all the flowers that were up. So you'll see it. It's Colchicum, Colchilcum. We talked about the reblooming percentage. Here's one that is so true. I have daylilies and irises that have spread and taken over and look messy. How do I clean it up? Dig up some bulbs or pull out the foliage?
Daylilies and iris?
Yeah.
Well, dividing and separating and thinning them out.
Yeah. That's what I would do.
Yeah. And if you don't have a new garden or a larger garden that you can put them in,
the garden club will happily take them and sell them at the plant sale.
You beat me to it.
But there, you always find people who are looking for daylilies and irises, as long as they are not the orange daylilies.
To answer that previous question, on this, what's showing on the screen now are two books that I recommend. I mentioned the Random House book of bulbs, and I think if you went through that, I remembered one that I saw just previous to starting this program was Trillium, listed as a bulb. And you've got your native Trillium. So there's one right there. So I think if you go through the book, you're going to find, and that makes me think that maybe it's worth a trip over to Framingham to what, Garden in the Woods?
It's no longer Garden in the Woods, but yes, and you would find it there.
Yeah.
One more. I don't know what my husband would say to this. Is it okay to cut down the foliage of the daffodils after they flower?
No.
No.
It isn't. That they have to go through that cycle. They have to rebuild the bulb. That's what the foliage is doing at that time, right out during the flowering period and after the flowering period. They're rebuilding the bulb, and actually, I don't know when they reestablish the flower in the bulb, but if you go and let's say you go down to Wilson's right now and you take a bulb out of the display when they get them and you cut it in half, you're going to see a little flower inside. So I would assume somewhere between the flowering and the time the foliage dies back, that next year's flower is already forming. So the feeding and the watering after they've flowered is important.
What people suggest with that, and I agree, sometimes the foliage looks pretty ugly for a while, is to have other plants around them that conceal some of that foliage, like we said in the Alliums and so forth. If you tie the leaves back with a rubber band, can they still benefit?
I think they can. You know, you kind of gently bend them over and just pull them in. It's not the best thing, but I think you can get away with it.
Okay.
The feeding and watering is important.
This was a great audience, lots of questions. And yes, Matt said he would send you all this, so you would have that. And before we say goodbye to Guy, I want to talk about next week quickly, which is with Linda Walsh. It's plan before you plant, or how you choose where you put your plants. How to lay out your hardscaping and plantings to be attractive, convenient, and durable over the life of your garden when first planting and long-term. Consider how you want it to look from the street, from inside the house, and within the garden itself. You will learn a lot from Linda. And I thank you, Guy, for being with us today. He will be back in the winter with more to tell us, and we certainly do learn a great deal from him, and he's been great fun to work with.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Goodbye. Well, everyone, thank you. Okay.
Thank you all
two
for
chat questions. Two chat questions. Oh, the two chat things for that. Okay.